Founder Jordan Estrada explains how his new nonprofit hopes to dissuade mass shooters by talking to them. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
Oh, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up today for our free newsletter if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America from a sober, serious perspective that focuses on hard news reporting and analysis over hot takes and opinion. This week on the show, we are going to be discussing a new nonprofit that has come up to try and implement some of the mass shooting prevention or mass violence prevention techniques that we've talked about previously on the show in the real world. So to do that, I have Jordan Estrada, the director and founder of Let's Talk to Them, a brand new 501c3 nonprofit, with us this week. Welcome to the show, Jordan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Stephen.
Can you tell people just a little bit more about yourself and the group before we get going here?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jordan Estrada. My background was in the national security industry. I've also worked as a volunteer first responder for 8 years. And in that work, I had frequent exposure to basically preparation and, the whole efforts to stop mass shootings. A lot of it on the prevention side. As a first responder, as a security consultant, all your work is about what happens if a mass shooting is going to occur and how to prevent, how to respond to that. And throughout the many years I did that, it was always clear to me that response was never enough. We had to do something much more proactive, much more upstream. And really the incipient moment for me was in 2022. The back-to-back mass shootings in Buffalo, New York, and Uvalde, Texas. That was kind of the moment for me when all the research, all the exposure I had to this phenomenon kind of came together, and it struck me that I had to do something personally about it. So I brought together a group of very talented people that were within my network, and we basically had a brainstorming session of what can we do in response. And from that brainstorming session came this incipient idea that everybody is talking about mass shooters, but nobody's trying to talk to them, before they act, to reach them before they actually act. And what was very interesting to us, and what formed kind of the problem statement that we set out to solve, is that every other mental health crisis, if you're struggling with any other whether it's eating disorders, suicide, gambling addiction, drug, alcohol, if you research topics related to that, you will immediately get an abundance of resources designed to help you, speaking directly to you, acknowledging your problem, acknowledging that you're having this struggle, and offering solutions to help that. In contrast, we found no such approach for individuals who might be researching or thinking about mass shootings. If they're online, studying previous mass shooters, there's so much information about there talking about that, but there's really very little speaking to that individual who's interested in this to de-escalate and deter them. And that's really what we decided we had to do to kind of fill that gap and change that.
Interesting. Yes, I think that's absolutely true. And we were just reminded of the need for this this week, where we saw an act of mass violence, a terrorist attack in New Orleans on New Year's Day. And then obviously we had before the Christmas and New Year break, we saw a school shooting in Wisconsin as well. We'd had a relatively is the key word here, of course, a relatively slow year in 2024 for these sort of mass shootings, at least. But it's very clear at this point now that that's not necessarily something that is going away anytime soon on its own. And
for sure.
And a lot of the discussion we have after these events, whether it's this mass killing with a truck in New Orleans or a mass shooting at a school in Wisconsin, about laws restricting firearms is a very common one, or these other broader ideas of how to try and restrict immigration or something like that to weed out potential terrorists coming into the country or something along these lines. And the discussion is rarely centered on reaching out to people who are in the kind of mental health spiral that results in a self-starter terrorist attack or a mass act of violence of some sort. And we've talked about it on the show a lot in the past. We've interviewed a number of experts on this area. We just talked to Catherine Schweit, former FBI agent who was in charge of the active shooter reporting program there. We've talked to Dr. James Densley, who's a professor and co-wrote a book called The Violence Project about how a lot of these attackers, whether it's this person who pledged allegiance to ISIS before, killing 15 people on New Year's Day, or it's the school shooter who wore the same shirt as the Columbine killers, they go through a similar mental health spiral to get to the point that they end up carrying out these acts of violence. And there are a number of identifying signs that this is happening to somebody along the way before they actually carry out the trigger. And there's what the Violence Project calls off-ramping that's possible for these people, and that someone could intervene along that path and put them onto a different path so that they don't end up committing violence. And this is something that has happened in real life on many occasions in the past. They document some of them in the Violence Project. But there hasn't, to this point that I'm aware of, been an organized effort to do that off-ramping on a like consistent basis and reach as many people going through this mental health spiral as possible. Because oftentimes I think we look at these perpetrators after they've carried out these horrible acts, these acts of evil, and you just sort of assume that they're people who weren't reachable and couldn't be helped, that they're, inherently bad or evil or what have you, instead of somebody who is potentially could have been connected with and put on a different path. And so it seems to me that that's what you're trying to do here in practice. So what are some of the reasons that you have decided to go this way? What is some of the research that's inspired you? I think you've referenced the Violence Project on your website. Is that one of them? Where did you get the ideas for how to reach these attackers before they carry out their assaults?
Sure, yeah. So the Violence Project has definitely been extremely instrumental in guiding our approach. We leaned very heavily on the works of both James Densley and Gillian Peterson. So huge thanks to them for the work they put into that. It is very enlightening about not only how the problem progresses, but also how you can get involved in, like you said, off-ramp people. And really the idea we had is that we see that same off-ramping for every other mental health struggle. Every other mental health struggle, we're using the same sort of off-ramp approach as kind of a mental health best practice to get people who are in the early stages of ideating some drastic action, whether it's suicide, again, eating disorders, gambling, addictions, any of these types of things. We are actively using that same practice to off-ramp people and everything else. And our question is, why not use it for mass shooters as well? And we talked to a number of researchers, and they were like, yeah, absolutely. That's a great. We've had an extensive advisory board of mental health experts, law enforcement, psychiatric individuals, neuroscientists who have reviewed our approach and kind of signed off and given us, the green light that this is something that we should be doing. And when you talk about, the unreachability of these individuals, one of the key quotes that really made an impact on me and kind of made it clear to me that we had to do this was a quote from the kind of the manifesto of the Buffalo shooter. And he said that he said something to the effect, it's not a verbatim quote, but every time I have doubts about going through with this, I get onto this 4chan board and kind of re-inspire myself. And this impacted me a lot because it shows us that these individuals, there's no guarantee that they're actually going to go through that. They experience doubts, uncertainties, just like everybody else doing anything. And when they have those doubts, go ahead, sir.
Often they'll have leakage of their plans, like they'll tell somebody or give a hint that they were going to carry this out or whatever, and that maybe is even a sort of almost a cry for help in certain situations.
Absolutely, yes.
And you're saying those moments are the ones you're trying to capture, just to reach these people.
Exactly. So when that individual is contemplating committing a mass shooting and having doubts and kind of going onto the internet to re-inspire themselves, we want them to find us. Is really where we position ourselves.
So sort of like you're talking about mental health interventions for people who are for contemplating suicide or having gambling addiction or other alcoholism or something, because you see a lot. For instance, almost any media now where suicide is depicted, they will show you at the end or somewhere in there a way to reach out to the suicide hotline, right?
Yeah.
Or some sort of resource for somebody who may be having suicidal ideation that is strengthened by watching the piece of content that talks about suicide or just includes suicide in some way. And you're saying that. Obviously gambling too. Every gambling ad has a little thing at the end of it that says, if you're addicted to gambling, same for alcohol. So there are oftentimes these discussions or also ads, of course, too, that bring up these topics have some sort of resource that's also presented alongside them. And we don't have anything really like that for,
we do not.
or if you Google, ways of committing suicide, Google is going to put up a resource. You're going to
immediately get tons of, probably the first 2-3 pages of Google is all going to be resources.
Yeah.
But we don't have that.
So we don't have that for somebody contemplating killing some group of people, carrying out an act of mass violence.
In contrast, a lot of the first page results for Google is exactly the type of thing that would incite or inspire an individual to go forward.
So you want to be, and there just really aren't a lot of those resources. Like there isn't a suicide hotline for somebody contemplating mass violence, really. I mean,
not specifically, no.
Certainly there's, as the Violence Project talks about, there's a kind of connection between suicide and mass violence. Oftentimes an act of mass violence is a sort of suicide attempt for the person who's carrying it out. But, that's not what the suicide hotline is set up to handle. And so what you're trying to do here, it sounds like to me, is create something like that.
Yes.
Create the resource for somebody who's considering this, because it's kind of a taboo thing, right? Creating a resource for, somebody like the Buffalo shooter, who's like this racist murderer, right? Mm-hmm. To try and keep him from becoming that is not necessarily something that, Coca-Cola is going to want to put an ad sponsorship on, right? But it's necessary, right? Or that's the idea here, that this could actually help. This could actually stop some of these attacks.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we have and are advocating for those same sorts of resources to be provided at the end of, content talking about mass shootings. We do find that, like you said, there's a resistance. I think the resistance stems from the fact that people want to think that, it takes a very unique individual, a very rare, unique individual to commit a mass shooting.
Right.
And that may have been true at one point. And it can be frightening to think that that's not true, but we actually see that potentially it's a hopeful thing, that there are lots of people who think about mass shootings, but then decide not to go through with it. And in as much as that happens, if it happens, then we can replicate it, and then we can figure out how to, do it for the individuals who are more serious or committed.
Okay. And so you read this research, you consulted with these experts who've studied this phenomenon and have identified patterns and behavior that you think you can disrupt and off-ramp those who are considering this. And, that these people are honestly more like a normal person, a regular person, than somebody who was just born evil and wants to kill everybody. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not the reality of what these people are like. They're generally going through a mental health crisis, and that can lead them to a horrific outcome. But but it is one that can also be short-circuited and stopped, and has been. Like, this is not all theory. This is stuff that's happened when people have off-ramped potential mass shooters in the past.
Yeah.
And so at the end of that process, you read the Violence Project. You consulted with a lot of different experts. They gave you advice. Well, how did you? What are the methods that you came to as putting this into practice? How does your program actually work?
Yeah. So our initial thought was we wanted to focus on SEO, basically search engine optimization, so that when an individual, types in something related to mass shootings, they would find our de-escalating content instead. And that is still something that is definitely a goal that we're still working for. That's an extremely competitive field of just, getting into that top Google results for something as heavily researched as mass shooting. We don't necessarily have our young organization doesn't necessarily have the clout or the pull to really land in that space just yet. We are continuing to advocate that and reach for that as an aspirational goal, because we would like to see, like you mentioned, if you Google anything related to suicide, you're going to immediately get Google results for help and just to make sure you're okay and provide you with resources. And we would like to see a similar front page Google response if somebody searches for topics related to mass shooting.
Have you spoken with Google, by the way?
Yeah, we have. There's definitely a bureaucratic element, like a corporate bureaucratic element. There's the competing interests. So many other people are competing for that same space to kind of promote news stories or independent unique research on mass shootings. Sure. So it's extremely competitive, and it's not something that it's going to take a lot of, I think it's going to take a lot of advocacy and a lot of success stories, as we build on our success to kind of convince the powers that be in the search engine world to kind of move in that direction.
Okay. But so you one thing you want to do is when somebody's searching for a term that indicates they might be considering mass shooting, you want to be able to have your resources come up. Let's say that happens. What are they going to find? What do the resources look like?
Yeah. So that being said, we have to understand, we've talked about hotlines. There's an extreme aversion within these subcultures, within these communities, to actually call the National Suicide Hotline or a parallel hotline for mass shooters. It's it's laughed at. People make a lot of memes mocking it. There's almost like it's almost seen as like a taboo within these subcultures to call a hotline. That being said, there are many individuals who will call the hotline, and we see this with even just the National Suicide Hotline. There's the people who make fun of it, but it's still functioning effectively to help a lot of people. So with our resources, when people come to our care websites, we call them, we kind of have two equally, in my opinion, equally valuable resources on those care websites. And the first is for the people who are looking for help and connection. We have hotlines. We have warm lines, which if you're not familiar, it's kind of like it's a play on words, because it will get you help, but it's less likely to like trigger a law enforcement response or some sort of agency response if you call a warm line versus a hotline. So we have all these options for people to reach out for help. We have communities they can connect with, but we also understand that a lot of people are not going to call a hotline or a warm line or talk to anybody because they don't want to out themselves. So we also, on our care websites, we build all these resources of like media content, blog content, literature, specifically speaking to these individuals, with the idea that if we get them on our care website, even if they're not going to call for help, they might still see something that's going to spark their off-ramping process. And again, going back to that quote from the Buffalo shooter, he hit websites that inspired him and escalated him. We want to get those people to hit our website, which will calm people down, de-escalate them, and give them, hopefully hope for recovery, even if they're not going to actually call a hotline and seek counseling. Like we have to deal with that. Like a lot of these people are not going to actually seek help, but we can still help them with, even if they're not going to actively seek help.
Right. And so if they land on your website and they get to these resources, what are the kinds of, like, how are you off ramping them? What are the kinds of things, messages you're sending? What have you seen as going through all this research? What is it that the strategies you landed on for trying to convince somebody not to carry out an attack like this?
Yeah, a big thing is enlisting the help of what's called within the industry formers, people who formerly had mass shooter ideation and then pursued a path of recovery. We have a number of formers that we work with. The most prominent, which you probably are familiar with, Aaron Stark, who is the author of the TED Talk about how he was almost a mass shooter. So he's been very instrumental in kind of guiding our content, and we kind of use these voices of people who were in this space to kind of share the stories of, this is what I was going through, this is why I was contemplating violence, here's why I decided not to do it, and how it's positively impacted my life. So we share a lot of former content for formers. We also talk a lot about subjects that are of interest to individuals within these subcultures. Like we talk a lot about, philosophy, like philosophies of nihilism, dystopian, like the dystopian feelings that people have about our society in general. We talk about specific things like holiday depression. We talk about specific subculture. So there'll be like specific subcultures around a video game that's very popular within the kind of depressed internet user community. We'll talk about, the valuable things you can learn from that video game and how, you can use it to learn things about yourself. So basically it's just building this library of very relatable content that's relatable to these subcultures and helps them feel seen, helps them feel inspired, and hopefully gets them on this. Even if a lot of studies show, even if you can distract a person for a couple minutes in that moment when they're having, their peak suicidal ideation, that could potentially save their life. And it's all about like capturing their attention in that moment. And if I can share a little more, so we talked, SEO is the goal, but in the interim, we run outreach campaigns on social media where we're, kind of reaching out to these subcultures, kind of putting out a message of hope to them. And I'm very happy with, every time we get someone to our care website, because basically we're reaching people in kind of that like brain rot space on social media where they're just like in this infinite doom scroll, consuming content that may or not be helpful. And we're actually able to get people to leave that brain rot internet scroll and come to our care website where they can be exposed to all this helpful content and the options for connections as well. So just that fact that we're able to get people to leave that kind of like depressed internet brain rot to come to our care websites is, to me, anytime that happens, it's a moment that somebody is potentially being helped.
Right. Because, as you alluded to with the Buffalo shooter, or as anyone who's, researched this topic or suicide ideation generally knows this is not something that is necessarily an all at once thing where somebody is it's a downward spiral, and then usually they'll go into lows and come back up and go into lows and come back up, and then eventually you get to a low that they can't get out of, I guess is the idea. And so if you can interrupt that low with a resource that they can relate to, that is speaking, their language is referencing things that they talk about in these subcultures that you're describing, but in a different perspective that takes somebody out of the spiral, that can save them really, and anyone else that they might harm. So that's interesting. That is a pretty fascinating thing to see put into practice. So do you have some numbers on this? What, how long have you guys been operating now? Obviously you just got your 501c3 designation. I looked it up on the IRS website myself. It is legitimate. You guys are an operating nonprofit now. Donations are tax deductible to 501c3s. But, brand new. You just really started all this, but not today. So you've been around a little while, and you've been able to implement some of these programs. What are you seeing so far?
Yeah. So again, we started in 2022. Our first year was basically just research, understanding, learning, trying to like position ourselves to have something to offer. We went operational in 2023, second half of 2023. We began these social media outreach campaigns, more of kind of like a test pilot program to kind of test workability, see if we could get people to our care websites and then click through to counseling after that. And based on that, we went more, I would say, fully operational in 2024. We ran outreach campaigns for 136 days in 2024. During those outreach campaigns, we reached about 260,000 individuals within at-risk populations on social media. We were able to get 21,000 of those individuals to our care websites, and then 136 of those individuals went ahead and clicked through to counseling resources. So that's just from 136 days running those campaigns. So we're very happy with that. Again, we're reaching a very niche demographic. If this was a marketing campaign, if I was trying to sell a product, this conversion rate would be not workable. But because we're trying to reach such a small subset of the population, when we see small numbers like that, it's a very small minority of individuals who actually carry out these attacks. So we are looking for a very kind of bespoke, small, almost a conversion funnel there.
Which is the difficulty of it, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's only these attacks get a lot of attention because they're spectacles and they're designed to get a lot of attention. Yeah. And they fit kind of unfortunately in a very specific niche for media coverage as well. But they're really the Violence Project count. There's only 7 or 8 of these that happen a year, so you only have 7 or 8 perpetrators that, at least as far as carrying out successful mass shooting attack, they don't count necessarily the other acts of mass violence, but it's not a huge number of people that are even attempting. Even if you look at the FBI active shooter count, which includes a lot of incidents where the person didn't successfully harm anyone else, it's still not a big number of people, especially in a country as large as the United States. Yes. And presumably this also has an impact around the world, right? Your content is available to anyone, anywhere.
For sure, yeah. We're currently we run the outreach campaigns targeting the United States, but we see like the content gets spread organically. We see interactions in other countries, and eventually, as we grow, we'd like to offer the same sort of campaign globally.
Sure, but you're trying to zoom in on a very small population. Yes. That's not necessarily trying to interact with you. Correct. That's not their goal when they log into these websites, and they're having these sorts of thoughts. And so, it's that's a tall task, but it sounds like you're having some success so far with this and reaching this demographic. And you mentioned counseling here. Obviously, one of the hallmarks of a lot of these people who are susceptible to this sort of mindset, this mental health spiral. Are people who are abused themselves in some way, especially as children. Is that part of when you refer someone to counseling, what does that process look like? Do you get them to, people like actual counselors, other organizations that that specialize in sort of trauma that they've experienced? How does that work?
Yeah, and like you said, that's huge. If you look at the kind of the pathway that the Violence Project outlined, the very first kind of step is a critical childhood moment of some sort of abuse or harm. So we are partnered with a great organization. It's called Death to Life. They run a 24/7 crisis response line. They have a number of counseling options available. So we partner with them. They're our sister organization, and if an individual comes to our care website and wants to pursue that, they're the organization that we partner with, and it's kind of a seamless transition to hand off to them. We're almost operating as a single entity from a UI perspective, and so they have that option. I should mention here that one of the things that sets our organization apart from probably other people who have thought about doing this or kind of like the federal programs doing this is that we don't engage in any surveillance on the people we're trying to reach. And the best way I could describe it is that there's a lot of efforts to try to find the next mass shooter. We're not trying to find anyone. We're trying to get them to find us. And it's almost like we locate the dark, kind of like the dark corners of the internet, the bad neighborhoods of town on 4chan or Reddit or Instagram, and then we put up a billboard in those dark places in town and try to attract them to come to us. So we see as people interact with that content, but we don't necessarily, and neither do we want to specifically find out about those individuals, because we want people to feel comfortable interacting with our content. We don't want them to feel surveilled, and neither do we want to, leverage any sort of dystopian or totalitarian, or, some sort of solution where we're, engaging in like people have brought up the subject of like Minority Report, pre-crime. That's always something you have to be careful of. And the way we thread that needle is that we don't search for people or find them. We get them to find us, and we see that when they interact with our content. But we may not necessarily know, what happens to them afterwards. We can do our part, and then it's definitely a multi-tiered approach to on this whatever the individual is, like on their pathway to recovery.
Right, because that's one barrier for reaching somebody who's going through this mental health spiral, is that they don't want to be
correct
known. They're considering something, obviously illegal, but also just that most people would consider, horrendous and morally reprehensible. So they don't necessarily want to be. They want to be in anonymized,
correct,
internet spaces a lot of the time. Not every time. Like I said, there's leakage but often leakage happens to people they know in some way, not necessarily, not always online. But it is. So that's a key thing too, I would imagine, is like trying to assure these folks who might be open to reading what the resources that you have, that they're not going to be immediately turned over to the police or what have you.
Correct.
So you're kind of making it more of making it more likely that they might actually.
Exactly. Yeah. The best way to give people confidence that it's not a surveillance op is just to not, like, we don't have any ability to surveil the people who are interacting with our content. And I think that gives them a lot more confidence, to interact with our content and know that it's not going to, put them on a list or get them in danger. Because we are dealing like we are very much upstream. We're dealing with, like, I talk about potential perpetrators, and then I talk about at-risk individuals. Potential perpetrators, that's what gets all the publicity. That's the people who have a plan, who are thinking about it. But we're even upstream of that, with what I call the at-risk people, who are at risk of thinking about mass shootings. And we definitely don't want to get those people on lists or make them feel targeted in any way, because they haven't done anything. They're just in danger of having thoughts. And we want to, help them at that stage, when it's very much, about helping them, not enforcing against them.
Right. And so can you give us any, specific examples of, within reason, obviously, like you said, you're not trying to, publicly name people that you've helped or anything like that. But, it's been a little while now. You've had some of these programs running. Do you have some specific examples of people that you've been able to help, or what are some of the ones that stick out in your mind?
Sure. Yeah. And another one of the things that we're expanding into that kind of directly answers your question is the role that bystanders have in preventing mass shootings. So we're running these campaigns. We're putting up this material multiple times. We've been contacted by a concerned family member or concerned, facility member, being like, "Hey, I see your content. I see what you guys are doing. Like, I actually have concerns about this family member or this individual at my school." So in 2024, we assisted in 6 of these situations where somebody reached out to us with a specific threat, whether it was a family member, or in one case it was a school had received a direct threat. In 2 cases, it was schools that received direct threats. One was that they had stated on this day in October, everything's going to go down, that sort of thing. So we were able to help in those six situations, because we've built up this kind of body of knowledge, this institutional knowledge about how to interact and deal with a potential perpetrator. So how it looks in that situation is that, like using the example of the family member, somebody reached out to us and they were like, "Hey, I have this person in my family. I've been reading your material. They exactly fit what you're talking about. What do I do?" So we were able to coach that person, come alongside them, provide them with resources, not just of typically in that situation, the resources are all about, how to report them, how to contact the FBI. We have those resources as well. It's very important. We never want something, if there's an immediate threat to life and safety, we definitely want to capture that information. But we also provide resources about how to talk to somebody who is having thoughts of mass violence. What you can do as their friend, like how you can share and connect with them. And so we come alongside bystanders and provide those resources. And that's really been another way. Direct outreach is important, but reaching out to the friends and family members of potential perpetrators is crucial when you consider, the fact that you said that leakage exists in so many cases.
Mm-hmm.
There are people,
and there's a lot of signs too.
Yeah,
right? Like
there are
changes
people
in behavior.
For sure. Yeah.
Stockpiling firearms when they weren't into collecting guns before.
Yeah.
References to other shootings in the past in a positive light. These sort of things. There's signs that people can look to, in addition to maybe the potential the person going through the spiral openly saying that they want to do this. There are other things people can notice as well too. Right?
It definitely seems like it's never a surprise to the people around the individual. So one of the ways we're expanding and one of the programs we're deploying is to kind of reach out to the broad population with just tools and resources. Like if you know somebody who's either a potential perpetrator or who is at risk of having these thoughts, like here are ways that you can help them and offer them yourself.
You've had people actually reach out to you and you've been able to walk them through that process already, even in this early stage of the project.
Yes, because we've been putting out these programs broadly, both the direct outreach and also raising awareness about the need to fill the gap in this our national mental health response, and it's generated a lot of positive feedback and like we were just talking about, in some cases people have directly asked us to help in specific threats.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the structure of the organization here as we wrap things up a little bit. You just got this 501c3 designation. Yes. What's the size of your group at this point? What's the funding level? Do you don't have a 990 yet because you just formed as a nonprofit, but you will be filing one soon. And just what are the details of the organization itself?
Sure. Yeah. So for the first, when we first started back in 2022, for the first kind of 2 years from, I think it was June of 2022 to like July of this past year, we operated as a subsidiary of a parent nonprofit that kind of incubates nonprofits. So we kind of operated under their umbrella. Then in July of this year, we kind of began the process of launching off on our own, and culminating in getting our 501c3 status at the end of this year. We don't have any 990s yet because of that brand new nonprofit status. We will be filing a 2024 990, which will kind of cover that, basically the last few weeks of 2024.
Just for people who don't know, the 990 is the report to the IRS about your financial transactions, and that'll be made public when it's filed.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, as far as organizational structure, we're still very small. We rely very heavily on volunteer and contract work. I try to keep everything, keep the administrative costs low, keep the overhead very low. So that's something I'm very committed to. We have a team of about six people on the team, most of them part-time or contractors, and I'm very thankful with how much we've been able to do just with that small team and with a relatively small budget. And it just makes me think as we grow, as we have more, I can't imagine how much more of an impact we'll be able to make.
And speaking of which, how can people get involved if they want? Like, they can donate to you, but they can also volunteer, right?
Yeah. So we are always looking to connect with people kind of on three levels. Obviously, as a nonprofit, we rely on donors, so we would greatly appreciate that. But we also rely very heavily on volunteers. We have a number of volunteers, some of them formers, who kind of create the content that we use to reach the potential perpetrators. So always always great to interact with volunteers who either have skills in like blogging, content creation, Instagram videos, creating even stuff like TikTok videos. Like all that is very helpful because that's how we reach. We use every medium possible to reach these individuals. So always connecting with volunteers. And then we also look to connect with people who want to, we offer consultation and education to individuals who kind of want to learn, what to do if a family member or a student in your organization is, how to identify those at-risk populations and then how to reach them, way upstream of when actual threats are being made. We offer education and consultation on that and are happy to connect with individuals who kind of want to build that into their overall mass shooting prevention strategy.
So for like schools or
schools, churches,
companies,
companies, and even just family members. It's something like everybody has a role to play in this, and we want to equip people with the tools we've amassed from all of our research and experience reaching out to these individuals.
So if people want to donate or volunteer or get connected with you, where can they do that?
Yep, they can go to letstalktothem.org, our website, and we have information there if you want to volunteer, if you have ideas for us, and of course if you want to donate or get involved, we have resources at letstalktothem.org.
All right, wonderful. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing the details about your new program. Personally, I think it's exciting to see somebody take some of this research that I think is really good and valuable and put it into practice in a organized way.
Thank you,
because it's not something I've seen a lot of to this point, and I do think it's something that could make a real difference. It's one of those things, I suppose, where you don't always know, right, how much of an impact it's having because you're preventing the bad things from happening instead of responding to them. Sure. But I think it's the most intriguing effort I've seen. Usually we're focusing on very different answers to the mass shooting or mass violence problem or self-starting terrorists. But all this stuff, there seem to be a lot of connections in the lead up to the events in these perpetrators' lives that are interruptible, right? There's patterns that come up time and again, and there are techniques to try and off-ramp people. And it sounds like that's what you guys are trying to implement. And I think that's a huge deal, honestly.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I hope that, people do go and connect and that you get more resources to work with because, we'll obviously track your progress and see how you're doing. And maybe we'll have to have you back on the show.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Down the line to do an update and to see how things are working. And presumably you'll be fine tuning things as you go along, reading more research, learning from your experiences.
Pretty much every week we iterate our campaigns based on what we've seen in the previous week, but it's definitely a learning and growing experience. And I appreciate what you said, that I couldn't say it better myself. This is I think something that's very necessary as somebody who's worked in the national security industry. The whole security industry kind of struggles with that metrical problem of how do you prove your value when your main metric is that nothing happened.
Yes.
But I think what excites me about this is that we definitely see as people are, as we're putting out this content, as people are interacting with it, we see almost daily feedback of how these at-risk subcultures are engaging with our content, and we fine tune off that feedback. But it also shows us that we're exactly in the right neighborhoods, sending out the right message.
Yeah, not an easy job, but one that's vital, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
And I appreciate that you guys are out there trying to have an impact in this area, because I think it's one of the things that may help us, get through this period we've had the last 20, 25 years of these sorts of mass violence attacks. We may never get to the 0 point, but I think we can do a lot better than we have. And this is an area where I see, backed by a lot of real world research, a potential for bringing down those levels. And I think that's what everybody wants to see.
Oh, yes.
So, look, like I said, I appreciate you coming on. I think people should go out and check out letstalktothem.org. And see if they're able to help in some way. But we'll have to have you back on in the future appreciate again for you taking some time to discuss this with us, and I wish you luck.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate you having me, and I will be in touch.
All right, that's all we've got for you guys this week. We will be back again real soon.